Hey everyone, it's Ryan from Ecuador, trying to share this beautiful country with you. Today I'm going to talk about one of my least favorite topics, politics. And I'm from Canada, where politics are pretty boring.
Order.
Indeed, Mr. Speaker, I apologize. It was a chocolate bar, but I apologize.
But everyone seems to follow the American politics system in Canada. And that's partially because it's unavoidable, it's all over the news. And it's also because, well, you know what they say about turning away from a car crash. I've always been a little baffled about American politics, but when it came to Ecuador, I found that what's happening in America is nothing compared to the wackiness of the politics here in Ecuador. I'm going to talk about Rafael Correa and Lenin Moreno, the most important two politicians in Ecuador right now, even though come February, when Ecuador has a new election, neither of them will be president. It's almost guaranteed. In fact, one of them is outside of the country right now, and if he returns to Ecuador, he'll be arrested and possibly charged with attempted murder. In the past year, I've been back and forth between these two guys. I would choose one and then I'd choose the other. I couldn't decide who was a better president for Ecuador. And then I sat down, I did a ton of research. It took me 2 days, and I finally figured out that it's actually more complicated than I thought it was. I still can't say I made a decision, but I want to lay it all out for you right now.
Y'all don't know people like this. Y'all don't know people like this. Y'all don't know people like this.
So this is Rafael Correa. He became Ecuador's 45th president in 2007 after running on a campaign that kind of painted him as this macho family guy. He didn't put up with any crap. He came from humble beginnings, and he really stuck up for the little guy. I'm going to vote for the guy just based on that. Correa was the first leftist president in Ecuador since 1979. He immediately stuck up for the Afro-Ecuadorians and the indigenous people of Ecuador. He appointed a Quechua woman to be the communications secretary and an Afro-Ecuadorian to be the Minister of Culture, which was actually the first black man to ever sit on the Ecuadorian cabinet. He really changed Ecuador. He built a lot of roads, he increased the minimum wage, reduced poverty, he put a lot of money into education and health. He really just improved the quality of life in Ecuador. But to do this, of course, it cost a lot of money, so he reduced the amount of money that was going towards paying off Ecuador's enormous debt. Ultimately, Ecuador ended up going into a recession, but it's not fully his fault. There was a giant earthquake, the price of oil went down, there were a lot of other factors to contribute to this. He did a lot of good things, but he also did some bad things. He would change laws to suit his needs. He shut down one of the biggest banks in Ecuador with no due process. Later on, the United Nations Human Rights Committee actually came in and reversed that decision, saying that it violated human rights. Correa hated the media.
On more than one occasion, he's ripped up newspapers that have criticised him because I guess he doesn't realise that newspapers tend to print more than one copy.
There's a big newspaper in Ecuador called El Universo, and they called him a dictator. And he lost it, he got angry, he sued them, and the courts ruled in favor of Correa. Many people believe the courts were in his pockets, and they ordered El Universo to pay him $40 million, more than the newspaper was actually worth. Suing El Universo really put a fear in the other newspapers that might write something negative about him. Also under Correa, the government-owned media went from 1 radio station to 5 television channels, 4 radio stations, 2 newspapers, and 4 magazines. So he really took over the media during his presidency, which, you know, you control the media, you control the message that people are getting. My favorite Correa story happened back in 2010 during the financial crisis. He cut some money to the police department, and the police got angry. They blocked roads, they shut down the airport, they stormed a state-run television station. So Correa agreed to meet with them and talk it out, and they really couldn't come to a conclusion. And Correa essentially said, and I'm paraphrasing, "I'm not taking one step back. Kill me if you have the guts." The police didn't have the guts, but they did have the guts to take him hostage. They locked him up in the police headquarters, and then in the middle of the night, some military specialists broke in, they clashed with the police, and they rescued Correa. That was just 10 years ago. Can you imagine if you turn on the news and found out that Obama was being held hostage by the police department. The people of Ecuador generally like Correa. I met a guy the other day who was just raving about him, saying he was one of the best politicians of all time anywhere. And I asked him about the corruption, and he kind of dodged the question and said it was too complicated for him to explain in English. The corruption that I'm talking about didn't actually come fully to light until recently. He's been found guilty of aggravated passive bribery. He was awarding state contracts to businessmen in exchange for undue contributions to his political campaign. Testifying to this was one of Correa's former advisors who had been arrested, and she agreed to testify against Correa in order to get her freedom. She produced a handwritten notebook that she wrote on a whim 4 years after, that had all these transactions written in them that were illegal transactions. How she was able to remember these exact numbers 4 years after the fact, that's something to question, I suppose. To further complicate things, the day before the verdict was announced, an email leaked between the secretary of the prosecution and the judge, and it essentially had a draft of the final sentencing in the email. Correa's lawyers will appeal this case, and I'm sure that they'll argue that this is a political witch hunt with no respect for due process. But that's not the only trouble with the law he's in. When he was president, one of his colleagues, Fernando Balda, he decided he's jumping ship, going to the opposition, and they tried to organize a coup in 2010. It was stopped, and Balda actually fled to Colombia. Then in 2012, Balda was walking down the streets in Colombia, and 4 men and a woman grabbed him, threw him in a car, and drove off. Luckily, a taxi driver witnessed it. He called the police. The police eventually found the car and basically rescued Balda. 6 years later, so we're at 2018, a Colombian lawyer came out and said that he attended a meeting with Correa and a bunch of other people. In that meeting, they discussed how they had to wipe out Balda, how they had to kill him. And one of the people who backed this up was the former head of something like the Ecuadorian style of the CIA. And he said that he was in the meeting, it was all true, and he had been sent to Colombia to find the people to do the actual kidnapping and the murdering of Balda. The judge ordered Correa to appear in court, but Correa now lives in Belgium with his Belgian wife, and he refused to come back to Ecuador for this. So he's basically a wanted man now. If he comes back to Ecuador, he's going to be thrown in jail for the bribery charges, and he'll have to face the courts in regards to the kidnapping charges as well. Now, the Ecuadorian government actually tried to get Correa extradited from Belgium for this, but Interpol stepped in and said, no, this is a political matter. There's not enough evidence, basically, to support extraditing him from Belgium. Many former members of Correa's team have been charged with bribery. Some of them have been thrown in jail, but a lot of them actually escaped the country. They're in Mexico or wherever, and that kind of sounds like a guilty act. They got wind, they took off or whatever, but actually Ecuador's government was pressured by the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights to let these people go, which is further evidence that international organizations don't really trust in Ecuador's judicial system. So all these charges had come to light after Correa had left office. Where did they come from? How did they come up? Well, that brings us to Lenin Moreno, the current president of Ecuador. Moreno was actually Correa's vice president for 7 years.
Are you the best friend that I ever had? I've been with you such a long time.
After Correa served his full 3 terms, he was popular enough to get voted back in 3 times. Moreno took over as head of the party, and he got elected president in 2017. Moreno supported Correa, and Correa supported Moreno all the way up until he was elected. And then as soon as he became president, he started going more right-wing. He accused Correa of corruption, and all these stories started coming out. Moreno's actually in a wheelchair, which is unique for a president. I think he's the only active president in a wheelchair in the world right now. He was shot in a robbery attempt in 1998, and he lost the use of his legs. When he was vice president, he actually did a lot of good things for disabled people. The budget in Ecuador for disabled people was something like $100,000 a year, and he boosted that up to $5 million. He was actually nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize for it. Despite this, he is quickly becoming one of Ecuador's most hated people. I think it has to do with him changing his political views. He was left-wing, now he's right-wing. I guess he comes off as a two-faced person, a bit of a liar. People feel like they can't trust the guy. His approval rating went from 77% when he was elected all the way down to 7% as of February. Moreno has been through 4 vice presidents in just 3 years. One of his vice presidents was let go and then quickly arrested. He's currently serving 6 years in prison for accepting $13.5 million worth of bribes. When I first arrived in Ecuador, I kept seeing the headlines, Moreno's arrested another person for being corrupt, and I thought, this is good, this is great. He's cleaning up Ecuador. But then you do a little bit of research and you find that this has happened time and time again. Everybody seems to be throwing the opposition in jail. There's corruption everywhere. Everyone's getting accused of corruption. You don't know what to believe. Moreno himself has been accused of corruption, of course. I think abuse of power is a difficult thing to control, so the people of Ecuador just look at the politics and they see what they've done for the country, what they're doing for the country, and that's how they decide. They kind of ignore the whole corruption thing. You have to, really, because it's just everybody's getting accused of it. So let's look at the politics. Let's compare Correa and Moreno when it comes to actual things that they've done. Correa has helped the poor by taxing the rich. Moreno, on the other hand, he lowered the taxes for big businesses in the hopes of bringing more big businesses into Ecuador. Moreno supported an increase in drilling in the Amazon, while Correa is more of an environmental guy, but he approved a drilling contract for China to go in, because essentially Ecuador owes China like $7 billion. The relationship with the US has always been a point of contention in Ecuador. Correa is against the US. He would rather work with China. He said that China provides things like infrastructure rather than just taking from them. As soon as Moreno got in, he started mending the relationship with the US. He let them use the airbase on the Galapagos Islands, and he also revoked the asylum for Julian Assange. There's also an issue with the International Monetary Fund. The IMF loans money to a country, and Ecuador basically owes them a ton of money. Correa didn't really want to work with them. They want to set up things like, okay, you got to do this, this, this in order to get this loan. And Correa kind of went back on that and he said, no, we're not going to listen to you. We're going to do it our way. When Moreno was elected, he borrowed even more money from them. I think they currently owe something like $17 billion or something. It's a huge number. And in order to get that money, he had to kind of agree on a payment plan, a certain set of things that they want him to do in order for him to pay back the money. So Ecuador has some of the cheapest petrol costs in the world, and the IMF suggested if you want to make some money so you can pay us back, you should chop the subsidies. So they did that, and fuel prices essentially doubled overnight. This led to the 2019 protests in Ecuador. For a week, people blocked off streets, they closed down the airport, there was a curfew, we were basically stuck in our house for days, and Moreno eventually caved on the whole thing. He put the subsidies back in place. Correa tried to change the law so he could become president again. He wanted to make it so there were no limitations on how long somebody could be president, but Moreno squashed that. Even though Correa can't become president, he can still become vice president. Now, how can you do that when you're a wanted man? When you come back to Ecuador, you're just going to get arrested. Well, the Ecuador rule states that if you've been arrested, if you've been charged with a crime and even convicted, you can still run for office as long as the appeals process hasn't been completely exhausted. So right now it's a race. On September 18th, Correa can announce that he's going to run for vice president. If the entire appeals process hasn't been completed before then he'll be immune from prosecution until the voting is done. However, if they manage to rush the appeals process through and Correa doesn't successfully appeal it, then he may never be able to return to Ecuador. Interestingly enough, the whole coronavirus pandemic has really helped out Correa because it slowed down the whole court process. Moreno, on the other hand, has already announced he's not going to run for president again. with a 7% approval rating, there's just no chance he's going to win. However, if he can get his guy in, somebody who shares his political views, that's his ultimate goal now. However, Moreno himself has proven that you can't always trust the person that you're backing. So I'm pretty excited about the next election in February. I don't really know what's going to happen. I imagine Ecuador is going to probably go left more than right. In Ecuador, they really take elections seriously. If you're between the ages of 18 and 65, you have to vote. It's against the law not to. You could go to jail. They also stopped selling alcohol around that time. It's going to be interesting to be living in Ecuador during the election, and I'll make sure to share it with you guys. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and please let me know in the comments below if you have an opinion on this. I would love to hear from you, even if it's to tell me that I made a mistake somewhere. I found that the best way to get a grasp on this whole thing is by talking to Ecuadorians, and so I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Who are you with? Why? Correa or Moreno?
Prefer when I'm by myself. I don't wanna hang around y'all. Pray for good health. One day I'm gonna go all. Fuck around and buy the whole mall. Breaking that cake. Flexing 700 in the bank. Not a superhero, I don't save. Look at my face. Look at my grades. Don't match up, no love. Look at date. I just fade. When I hit the jack, you can keep the pie. Every night I gamble, I stop. Yeah. When I check the cost, I was like, oh, that's expensive. Ay.